All right, hello everybody. We're here today with Amit Mukherjee, and we are excited to talk to him about his new book, Leading the Digital World: How to Foster Creativity, Collaboration, and Inclusivity, all things that are near and dear to our heart at Cloverleaf. And I think for a lot of our coaches and a lot of our enterprise leaders, I think there's some really incredible wisdom here. So we're excited to share this with those who follow our brand. And if you don't mind, Amit, if you want to give us a little bit of background, a little bit about your history and kind of what you're researching and studying and what led you to writing this book, that'd be super helpful.
Okay. Hello, everybody. A pleasure to talk to all of you. I have a crazy quilt of a background. I'm an engineer by training. I used to say that I have an engineering degree, but I'm not an engineer. I'm smart enough to know the difference between having a degree and being one. But anyway, I have been an academic, and I'm now back to being an academic. But for a large part of my career, I was actually outside academia. I was a partner level consultant, a practice leader at two different major, well-known, globally renowned consulting companies. And I was the chief technology and strategy officer at a small NASDAQ listed company. We produced hard technologies, digital technologies, not software. And so I have a mix of a background with where I've actually led large teams creating first in the world products and services, and having researched all of that. This book came out of my experiences over the last several years. I'd written a book in 2009. It had come out, 2008 it had come out, The Spider Strategy, and it was about how no company is producing a product individually anymore. We were all taught, keep your core competences internal, close to your heart, everything else can be outsourced. That's nonsense, because you know what? I reach out, I'll grab my iPhone and I ask this question of executives. I show them my iPhone, said, Steve Jobs was a very smart guy, is considered one of the best CEOs ever. Could he have built the world's largest market cap without Corning? And the way I'm asking the question, they all know the answer is no, but nobody knows they're thinking about, why is the answer no? Well, the answer is no, because if you take away this glass, there is no iPod Touch, there is no iPad, there is no iPhone, there is no world's largest market cap, and it simply doesn't matter how smart Steve Jobs was, okay? So we have created a world in which organizations, even for basic core things, are dependent on other organizations. So the first book was about how that system works. This book was about, once you have created this world, how do you lead in it? Okay, and what allows you to lead when you're not leading people who report to you, but you are leading people who are completely different from you.
Yeah.
That's what the book is about.
That's great. Well, let's dive right in. One of the things I loved about how you started the book is really just kind of a definition of what truly is digital disruption. I think the phrase is probably overused in current business circles and in leadership circles as well. So I felt like you did a really fantastic job of providing examples of what isn't digital disruption, which I think will probably be surprising for some people to read, and what truly is digital disruption. And so if you can give kind of a high level summary and maybe even one or two of those examples, I think that'd be really good to just help people frame in their minds, why are we even talking about digital disruption? How's this different than, early 2000, the advent of the internet, or, in the mid 90s with the advent of the internet, and what's so different today?
Okay. I love that question. It basically puts me in the minority of people. I personally don't use the term disruption, but I have good company. So the person who came up with the term of digital disruption was, of course, Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen, who passed away last year, rather early, unfortunately. So now Clayton was one of my classmates when we were doing our doctoral work together at Harvard. And he actually, so he built on very well-established economic theory on what happens when a radical new technology comes in and attacks an existing technology. It's called the S curve, and you can look up the S curve. There's lots of discussions of the S curve. So Christensen came on out and said that the addition that he made was, well, even if it is a dramatically novel technology, if it helps a company with its existing customers, they will adopt it. And he called those technologies sustaining technologies. A disruptive technology was a technology which had no use for existing customers, and therefore companies ignored them. They appealed only to niche markets. Okay, so his research and his was published in a Harvard Business Review article in 1995, and where he introduced both the terms sustaining innovation and disruptive innovation. Of course, that was the time when we had the dot-com hype, and everybody just latched on to disruptive innovation. And so 20 years later, in 2015, Christensen wrote another article in the Harvard Business Review saying, guys, you are just killing this term. You're overusing it, you're abusing it, you're using it for all manners of changes, whereas it is only for changes which have specific characteristics. For example, Christensen would say that the original Netflix was, when it came out with CDs, was disruptive because it appealed to only a small market. CDs were not very well known at that time. You didn't have CD players very often. That's when it came out. It appealed to a very small market. It was cheaper. The quality was not very good compared to VHS. But once those things improved, then it became a disruption, not before. About Uber, he would say, Uber is not a disruption because there is nothing that Uber offers which is cheaper, which appeals only to a niche market. Uber to him was a sustaining innovation which takes taxi service to the next level.
And I think that was really the example that stood out to me as well, because I mean, I think most people would say, of course, Uber is a disruptive technology, right? Yeah. So I think that clarification was great. And I think it really helps us kind of roll into the next slide and kind of dynamic. And I think there's actually, I think you outlined 7 principles in the book. I've only focused.
Can I interrupt you for a moment?
Yeah, sure.
I don't know if you intend to roll the slides, but you're not rolling the slides. You're not advancing the slides. It's still stuck at slide 1.
Oh gosh, that's terrible. Hold on. Yeah, hold on 1 second. Let's try this again here. Can you see it now?
Yeah, I can see it, but it's on the first it's still on the first opening slide. That's all.
Okay, let's.
So now you're on number 2. So
let's try this again. Can you still see Can you see the title slide?
I can see the slide with the book on it right now.
Okay, and what about digital disruption? You still don't see that?
Nope.
Okay. Darned.
So you might have to just go to the thumbnail and advance it manually.
Yeah. All right. Give me 1 second.
It's not advancing because you don't have it. It doesn't look it's on presentation mode.
All right, there we go. Let's roll with that then.
Yeah, let's okay.
All right. So one of the things that you outline in the book too are some guiding principles, and I think there's actually more than six that you list in the book, but the six in particular that really struck me, and I think we spend a lot of time on at Cloverleaf in terms of building technologies to really help empower leaders navigate this well. It are a handful and listed on the slide. So a heavy focus on de-skilling and upskilling. Distributed work, which is obviously very front and center for a lot of people right now who are oftentimes working remote for the first time because of COVID. And then cerebral work, emergent needs, and then the last one, which I thought was really important, and I think is a huge element of our platform, is this idea of radical transparency. And that these principles are really kind of changing the workplace in a significant way. So can you maybe provide a little bit of background and perspective on that?
Yeah. So if you don't like the word disruption, and by the way, I would throw platforms into this as well. But if you don't, if you're like me and you say, well, there are problems with the word of disruption, you're describing everything as disruption, it doesn't work. So what do you do? So at the last school where I was teaching, I'm now at Hult International Business School at the Boston campus. I used to be at IMD, the Swiss business school. And our research center over there do a worldwide survey. And I asked them, hey, if digital technologies are so amazing, what do they do that prior technologies did not? If they're supposed to be changing the world, they have to do something that earlier technologies could not do. Otherwise, they wouldn't be changing the world. A constant cannot explain a change. It turned out that I found that no one had actually written anything on that subject in English, French, German, Italian, the languages used at IMD, at least around the world. And so I said, so what do digital technologies do? So one of the things they do is they de-skill. Prior technologies have also de-skilled. However, they de-skill in a very specific way. The number of new jobs they create when they de-skill an elite group is far fewer than prior technologies used to. They upskill people who don't have, you don't need to know stuff, but you can do it because your computer will help you. They upskill, but again, they help fewer people. Without distributed work, you couldn't have had outsourcing. Okay, they distribute work over time and space. The fourth one is really interesting to me. All prior technologies multiplied muscle power. This is the first technology which multiplies human brain power. Okay, and it really doesn't do much for muscle power. The fifth one, emergent needs, is also really interesting. So if you think about a car and you had a horse and buggy before that. Horse and buggy, you're shifting to the car. What will you need? Well, you'll need smoother roads. You'll have to replace stables along the roads on highways with petrol pumps, gas stations, and so on and so forth. So the needs that came out of inventions were predictable. Now you look at that same iPhone. Okay. The iOS was pretty basic. The power of an iPhone comes from the app shop. They come from unpredictable needs creating value. No one originally designing the iPhone thought of most of the stuff that's in the App Store. So the unpredictable needs are what create value. And the last is radical transparency. Radical transparency basically says anything which can be known will be known. Whether you like it or not, it is going to get out, okay? And sometimes it'll benefit you, sometimes it will not benefit you, but it is going to get out. You can't stop it. And therefore, you need to think in terms of leadership with that particular issue in mind.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good transition point into kind of that leadership conversation, which I'll advance to the next slide here in a second. And largely because I think what we see is people are still kind of stuck in that command and control mindset. And I think transparency, what we see at least with a lot of our organizations and clients and how they struggle through the cultural change is that seems to be one of the harder areas for us to tackle, right?
Yes.
Because it's just so ingrained in terms of how we approach leadership, how we expect to control certain aspects, and information, and providing transparency to that, and being, accountable really to that information, tends to be the thing that at least we see from a cultural standpoint that is most challenging for organizations and leaders.
Yes.
So a couple other things as we're transitioning to leadership. You mentioned actually a few fallacies. I think the two in particular struck me. One is that most people working together are governed by a common, this kind of assumption, this false assumption among leadership circles that people working together are governed by a common organizational culture, policies, processes, structures. The basis for us creating Cloverleaf was this idea that culture is created in the work teams that people are a part of. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole collection of those cultures that exist throughout, especially larger multinational organizations. Mm-hmm. And then the second piece is that most employees share a handful of cultural, lingual, religious, racial, political heritages, right? And I think clearly more and more we're seeing those walls kind of fall apart, at least here in North America, especially. But I think, even in other parts of the world, that kind of cross-pollination of cultures and especially in a distributed, geographically diverse
Yes.
work environment. And I love the quote that you included in this. Shortly after that, it said in the 20th century, it was easy to separate creation from all else, right? You use the term exploitation, but in contrast, digital technologies are increasing the importance of cerebral work, back to your principle number 4, mm-hmm. and that your research on using knowledge to compete has led you to conclude that every act of management must be an act of learning. So connecting those two false assumptions with kind of transitioning into this mindset of leadership is really all learning. What should we take away from this?
So you make a very good point, when you were talking about the transparency. Let me go back and start there. And I would encourage your coaches to think about not just the transparency, but the two prior ones on cerebral and distributed, okay? And how they apply to these assumptions. So in the past, a leader, if you think about any change management situation, the leader comes in and here is a group of people who are sitting there who are doing the wrong things. And now you need to change them and you've got to change their culture. Okay, that's traditionally what we have taught. Okay, now you're in a world in which the leader comes in where? Because the team is distributed around the world. Okay, the leader, how do you bring them together? Well, it has to be on something which is common, which goes beyond the immediate culture of the situation, because the people who are there are from all over the world and they don't share a common culture. Okay? They are in different companies, they don't share a common culture. There's something that you've got to create above and beyond these conditions. Now, where do these two assumptions come in? That's where the assumptions come in, because the world that I described, those two assumptions made perfectly good sense. You're walking in over here, most of the people look alike, they worship the same gods, they eat the same foods, they are governed by the same policies, and all of a sudden, both of these have gone away. And now that's your challenge of leadership, because work is distributed, because work is cerebral. Because work is cerebral, you as a leader have another problem. You don't know what you don't know. So Darren, one of the things that I do when I do executive education, I have a slide which shows me with my head back, my eyes closed, and I'm possibly sleeping, and I show that and everybody starts laughing, executives start laughing, and I show that slide and I said, so what am I doing? And everybody starts laughing. And nobody wants to say you were goofing off on the job, right? Because, I have my jacket and tie, not a tie, jacket and And then I advance the slide, and the next slide shows what is on the computer screen in front of me. And it is exactly the same slide that they are seeing. So what I was doing was I'd created the slide and I was sitting back and I was trying to imagine how that moment would go in the classroom. So when that happens, what is work? When work is distributed and you cannot see it as a leader, what is work? How do you lead? How do you motivate? And all of this is happening because of digital technologies.
Yeah.
And that's the point that I'm trying to make, that you need to get past these two fallacies. You need to start thinking about how you're going to get people who are very different and who can hold back their intellectual content to contribute.
Yeah, no, that's great. And we'll circle back to this here in a second. So the last slide, I talk about inclusivity, because I think you do spend a little bit of time on that. And obviously it's kind of a hot button item for in today's culture and context. But before I do that, there was like that transition to leadership is learning, right? The last quote on that previous slide. A couple of things that really stood out. I want to camp on that for a couple minutes here. So you made a couple of points that I really, really loved. And the focus was really on kind of tenure in leadership and the expectation around how fast we need to come up to speed to be effective in a leadership role in this new digital environment. Yes. And two things that really stood out to me, right? Time to expertise has been severely compressed. And then, in the survey and the research that you did that underlied the book, you talked about, with your survey responses, most fell into that 24 to 36 month range. And you summed this up really well. And you said, so in 2 to 3 years, the average executive had to transition into a job, master its idiosyncrasies, deliver noticeable value, find another job, and then move on, right? And that just sounds daunting, I think, for a lot of especially senior leaders and organizations. Can you talk a little bit more about what you saw in the research and what the implications are in terms of how we think about just broader talent strategies, selecting new leaders, succession planning, all of those kinds of areas?
Okay. That's a great question. And I'm just taking a note for myself so I don't forget. So here's what I did. So first of all, the research that you're referring to, one of the things that I did, Darren, as you know, is something that is normally not done is most leadership research is done in the US or done in the UK, places like that. And I actually surveyed 700 executives from around the world. And the distribution of the executives was roughly aligned with the distribution of the Global 2000 companies, headquarters of the Global 2000 companies. So I was getting a range of views of what was happening around the world. So around the world, one of the questions I asked was, when do people, I'm not going to go into the detail, I'm going to use the term consequential decisions, get the authority to make consequential decisions today? How many years of experience do you need? I also asked, how many years of experience did they need 10 years ago in your company? And only if both those questions were answered by a respondent was that taken into the survey, okay? And what you see is a dramatic drop in the average number of years of experience. 0 to 5 years are going up, above 10 is going down. You can very easily relate, as the book does, back to the principles as to why it is happening. I referred to another bit of research that a friend of mine, Michael Watkins, who wrote the best-selling international book, The First 90 Days. We have been dear friends for 30 odd years. The two of us did this research together where we asked executives at the mid-tier, the people that your coaches are probably dealing with, mid-tier, senior, how many years do you typically spend in a job? And this is what they came up with. So what does this tell you? It tells you that you constantly need to focus on learning. It is not what you know which is important. It is how fast you can learn, okay? And we don't emphasize this ability well enough. You cannot master everything. So what can you do? If you go back all the way to Peter Drucker had said, the difference between a good manager and a great manager is a good manager knows the answers. a great manager knows the questions. It seems to me, I love that quote. I absolutely love that quote. It's not an exact word, those exact words, but the essence is right. It seems to me along the way, we have forgotten the essence of that Peter Drucker point of view. And that's what we need to return to today. A great manager knows the questions. How do you know the questions? You need to increase your breadth of knowledge, not depth of knowledge. Most of us are trained to increase depth of knowledge. What can your coaches do? Ask your executives what they are doing and coach them. And you know, in the book that gives you how you can possibly do that, increase their breadth of knowledge. Focus on their breadth of knowledge. The more they know of stuff around them, the more likely they'll be able to ask good questions. They don't need to know the answers.
Yeah.
They need to be able to, And one last thing, Darren, I'll remind people, again, research that I didn't do, but a professor at Harvard and the president of Heidrick and Struggles and one of the principals there, partners there did, in a completely different context. One of the things they found was today, CXOs have more in common with each other than they have with the people that they are leading. So think about that for a moment. CXOs have more in common. A CXO in information, the CIO has more in common with a CFO than either of them has with the people he or she is leading. Same thing, breadth of knowledge, far more important than depth of knowledge. What are you doing to learn fast so you have the breadth of knowledge? Okay. Yep. That's the question that I would urge you. That was before, in preparing for this interview, I had written down that this is one of the things that I do want to urge your coaches to focus on. It's very hard to forget to do that.
Yeah, no, it's great. And one of the things I loved about your book is I think there really is a lot of really great practical guidance. So to your point about increasing breadth of knowledge versus depth, and there's whole like theoretical and research-based underpinnings behind that, but there are a lot of simple practical guidelines that I think kind of help increase leadership, capability and capacity in the midst of this new kind of digital period that we've entered. I would love to drill down on the inclusive mindsets piece. We're out of time. So I'm just going to leave this slide up here. I think back to some of the earlier points around, transparency, this sense that, that the two leadership fallacies around sharing the same cultures and the same backgrounds, right? I mean, we're seeing this play out, not just in the US, but across countries and geographies around the world. So I think there's some really timely advice in here about inclusive mindsets, and specifically focused really on that principle 3. And the thing that I thought was really compelling was the impact on trust. Mm-hmm. Right. So I'd love to spend more time on that. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I highly recommend you go find Amit's book, take a read on this. There's some really great practical guidance. Do you have any other things that you'd love to share with kind of our viewers today, our audience, that would be worthwhile for them to know as we leave them today?
See, one of the things I say in the book, and I want to, and I'll say that just to end off as we are out of time, on the inclusive mindset. It is really important to understand that when digital technologies focus on cerebral rather than physical, it is very easy for people to walk away. And you will never know what you don't know if people walk away or withhold their contribution. If you make a human being feel less of a human being in any way, shape, or form, he or she is not going to contribute to your efforts. So inclusivity in this world is dramatically important. And yes, I wish we could spend some more time talking about it, but let's just leave it there and say, yeah, it's So the term that I leave with you to think about, it is no longer a corporate social responsibility. This time it is existential. You don't lose it. So the book ends with this line which says, in the 20th century, we often said all hands on deck, but we only meant certain hands. In the 21st century, we need all brains on deck. And this time, if you say only certain brains, then you are going to lose.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time today. Where can people find the book? I'm assuming Amazon, obviously. Where else should they look?
It is widely distributed. It is available electronically. It is available in bookstores. MIT Press, which produced the book, by the way, in collaboration with Slow and Management Review. There is a Slow and Management Review article called 5 Must-Haves for the Next Generation Leaders. So they are distributing through Random House, so it's available around the world. If you go to my website, asmukherjee.com, you will be able to download the preface of the book, which sort of tells you what the book is about. And the preface begins by saying, if the preface doesn't convince you that this book is different from other books on leadership, don't bother to buy it, borrow it, or read it. That's awesome. So yes, I believe it is something unique. It is available widely around the world. MIT Press has distributed around the world. So, okay.
That's awesome. Great. Thanks, Amit.
My pleasure. Thank you. And all the best to your coaches. Appreciate your time as well.
Thanks a lot.